Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group's main meeting. So tonight we have the pleasure of Deepthi talking about Azure SQL security fundamentals. It's going to be a really good talk, and I guess I don't have very much else. One thing I did want to call out is just making, I have to do a couple of checks with the place where we're going to host the meetings. But starting in April, the main meeting will go back to being in person. And starting in May, we're going to do that hybrid. So April, our main meeting, because I'm not going to be in town, won't be able to do this online. But the other two meetings, the Advanced DBA and the Business Intelligence Data Science, will remain online. And then we'll go back to hybrid in May, where it'll be online and in person for the main meeting. So with all that out of the way, I'll have an email going out to TriPass members. I'll give you all the details. So with that, I'm going to hand it off and say, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your evening time to attend this session. I don't know where you are joining from throughout the world because it is a virtual event, like virtual user group. I would like to say hello and thank you so much. And before even beginning, I would like to thank Kevin and Tracy for giving me this very nice opportunity to present my session to you. Um, this is a new session. I have presented couple of times, but not more than that. So as we go, hopefully you like it. There is a lot of content to cover. So I asked Kevin if I can cover the questions later after the session. So if you have any questions, please put that in the chat window or like keep it to yourself. You can unmute later and then ask me the questions, or you can say tell to Kevin and Kevin can ask those questions for you. Um, so let's get started. My name is Deepthi Goguri, and I would like to present on the topic Azure SQL security. So I have mentioned this as a fundamentals 101 session because if you are very new to Azure, this will be a really good deep dive into security session for you. If you are already familiar, this will be like a real good brush up on your security concepts in Azure. A little bit about me. I'm a database administrator. Myself, my name is Deepthi again. I'm a database administrator having about like 8 years of experience as a DBA. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Um, I have been recently recognized as an MVP. It's been like a couple of months. It's really a very good honor to be part of the MVP program. And I'm a co-organizer for a couple of user groups. I'm a co-organizer for diversity, equity, and inclusion user group, along with Tracy Bogia, who is also a co-organizer for this user group. Um, and also, I'm a co-organizer for Microsoft Data and AI South Florida user group, and also Data TGIF. Um, and I do volunteer for Women in Technology user group as well. And apart from my work, daily work, as well as my community work, I love doing arts and crafts. Like I love making things with my own hands from scratch, and I feel really good. It's like a meditation, I can say. Um, and if you have any questions regarding this session later, please do not hesitate to contact me on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. It would be an honor to get in touch with you. And also, before beginning, I would like to say that I have written a blog series uh, talking like writing deep content about the security in Azure. If you would like to go ahead and look into it, go to dbanuggets.com and click on the Azure tab to find more details on series of blog posts in security about the security in Azure. So before beginning, I would like to start with a simple analogy here about the security. So let's say a thief wanted to do the bank robbery, right? So how do he actually plan to do the robbery? So before entering into the bank itself, he need to first go ahead and break the main door of the bank, right? So before entering into the main door, he have to pass through the he have to pass through the parking lot, right? No matter if it is back side of the door, front side of the door, he need to pass through the parking lot where we have several security cameras in place. for the surrounding the bank. So he have to first pass through that. The security cameras will obviously capture him, but if he put hoodies and stuff, and then he will not, definitely he will not show his face. So let's say he broke the main door of the bank, but then he have to, let's say he entered into the bank, and then he entered into the mini locker rooms inside the bank, and he tried to break those little lockers which may have like the digital lock or physical lock. He tried to open one or two locks, and he really got frustrated because it takes a lot of time. He don't have that much time. So he left that part, and then he tried to go to the main vault room where millions of dollars in the cash is present, right? So he tried to enter. Because it is a main vault, there is several security layers that he have to cross, he have to break. So he tried to go, but there is this digital lock in place that he have to break first before even entering into the main vault lock door. So he tried different passcodes. Obviously it failed. So because there is this multi-factor authentication already set up in place, there is like, it may contain like, go take the, like, if the password is wrong for a couple of times, send a alert to the phone service for the security guard, or like send a call to the security guard, or directly send a call to the 911. So let's say he tried multiple times, and that call directly went to the 911. So police are alerted, and they are coming to catch the thief, and it didn't work. So he couldn't even go into the money vault. So what happens, like, as there are multiple security layers, in-depth security layers built in place, the thief cannot even go to the main vault room. He couldn't even enter into it. So definitely the police comes, and they catched him, and then they put him under the bars. So behind the bars, sorry. So in the same way, right? In the same way, let's say if the bank is a Azure, and if the money itself is a data is more than money, right? Because it have like sensitive information like SSN, whatnot, SSN, people name, addresses, whatnot, sensitive information. So there are like in-depth security layers in place in Azure. So if any bad guy want to enter and break into the system, and then get the data, he have to pass through different layers of security, in-depth defense mechanism it's called. So we are going to talk about each of these layers in depth today in this session. So there are like network security, like we have seen the thief entering into the bank, right? The first layer of security, the outer layer of security, is the security cameras in the parking lot. So that's like a network security is the outer layer of security. So as we dive deeper into the security layers, we have access management, threat protection, and information protection, where the data needs to be protected itself. So we are going to see each of these layers in this session. Like I have mentioned the same security concept layers here. So let's dive deep into each of them. So first, let's talk about the network security. Again, this is the outer layer of security before going into the in-depth layers. So there are like four different options available in network security. If you see from left side to right side, left side is the least secure, and as you move to the right side, the last option, the private link, is the most secure ones. Now let's talk about each of these layers. Allow access to Azure services, which is on left side, which is the least secure one. So if you select this option to true, right, if you turn this option on, any services, right? Any services within Azure can connect to your database. Once you turn it on, you don't have to think about any other network security to be set up. Any services within Azure can connect, but you cannot connect your on-prem SQL servers to Azure. This is not for on-prem. This is within Azure. So as it is using the internet, it is going to have the public IP address. Like if you do the NS lookup, you will get all of the information like DNS hierarchy, where your database is hosted, the region and control ring information, everything is shown, which is not secure at all. But you might be asking me a question. So if it is not secure, why do we even have this option, right? So the reason that we have this option is, let's say you are building a new database and you wanted to test it out in your development environments, but you don't want to go through all of these network security layers, and because you are just testing it out, right? In those scenarios, you can just build your database, turn this option on, and then you can quickly test your services connecting to your database and do some testing and then drop the database once you are done. In those kind of testing scenarios, this option is really useful because you do not have to worry about the complexity of the network security layers. The next option is firewall rules. This is like the firewall rules that you set in place when you have an on-prem SQL servers. Like if you wanted to connect in between two SQL servers, you set those firewall rules, in and inbound and outbound firewall rules. The same way, you will be creating the firewall rules here. The additional thing that we have when compared with the allow access to Azure services is that your on-prem SQL servers can connect to your Azure here, because we create firewall rules on each of those services trying to connect to your database. Here it will allow the on-prem connections, like I said, but it will still have the public IP address. When you do the NS lookup, because it uses the internet, the region information, control ring information, DNS hierarchy, everything is still shown up. It's still not secure. The next layer of security is virtual network rules. So here, let's say there are like different virtual networks that you have. You connect the different virtual networks together to one virtual network, where you will be creating the virtual network rule. You will only create one virtual network rule on one virtual network that is connecting to your Azure SQL database. You will not create virtual network rules on each and every virtual network. You will combine all of those different virtual networks together using the latest technologies like VNet to VNet. Um, there are like different technologies where you can connect, right? So you use those technologies and you will be only creating one virtual network rule on the virtual network connecting to your Azure SQL database. Even though you create the virtual network rule, you get the private IP address within that particular virtual network where you created this rule. But the thing is, when you do the NS lookup, still the information is still shown, like where the where your database is hosted, the control ring information, and all of that, because it's still using the internet. The last one is private link, which is the most secure, because in by using the private link, you will go ahead and create the um, private endpoint connecting to your database. So you will get the private IP address and you will block all of the public access. So there will not be any internet access, any service on-prem or in Azure, any service trying to connect to your Azure SQL database, they have to pass through this private endpoint. There is no other way. So when you do the NS lookup, the private IP address, because it have the private endpoint, none of the information like control ring information, none of the information is shown. Now let's see how these rules actually look like um, in this particular network, right? So let's say I have security demo, which is a SQL server that I have hosted, and underneath this blade, this is actually Azure portal. If you are familiar with Azure portal, you know what I'm talking about. You open up like portal.azure.com and go to your SQL server, and then in the left side pane, underneath the security blade, go to the networking, because we are talking about the network security here, which is the first layer of security. We are going there, which is networking, and um, highlighted showing as one, which shows like allow Azure services and resources to access this server. That is the least secure one. If you select this option, any services in Azure can connect, least secure. But when you check the second one, which is highlighted, We are trying to add the firewall rule. So let's for example, I would like to allow my local management studio, my local computer, to Azure SQL database. I would like to add the firewall rule with that IP address. So I will add the IP address of my local computer so that it will be allowed to connect to the Azure SQL database. I added that. Let's say I added that and I unchecked the first option, which is the allow Azure services and resources to access the server, which is least secure. I unchecked that. So because I added the IP address of my local system, now I'll go ahead and open up my management studio from my local system and try to connect to the Azure SQL database. It will be connected because I added this particular firewall rule to Azure. So I can connect. Now let's say like I would like to delete the firewall rule that I created. I would like to uncheck the least secure options, which is the allow Azure services. And let's see how to add the private endpoint. So to access the private endpoint or to create the private endpoint, again go to the server, security demo in my case. Underneath the security, you have networking blade. Click on that and select the private access so that you can create the private endpoint. So here I'm not going to show you exact step by step of how to create the private endpoint, but it is very simple. I will show you what all options, what all details do you need to create the private endpoint. So I have created here security demo PE, which is private endpoint. I will be clicking on that to show you like, actually I thought I have show you like what all details you need, but you need the subscription ID, um, and you need to make sure like where are you creating, on which virtual network are you creating this particular private endpoint. Those are the details that you need. So once I created the private endpoint, right, you need to specify on which virtual network you are creating. So um, I will try to test it out, like if that private endpoint is actually working or not. So I have a virtual machine, which is hosted on the virtual network where I created this private endpoint. So I will connect to that virtual machine. From there, from that particular virtual machine, SSMS Management Studio, I'll try to connect to the Azure SQL database from there. And then I'll run this query, which is simply, it is trying to get the client net address from where I am trying to connect to the Azure SQL database. So this is the virtual machine, right? It have to give me the virtual machine IP address, but it have provided like 10.0.0.7 IP address. Now I would like to make sure it is private IP address or not. So I'll go to my portal.azure.com again, and this time I will be connecting to the virtual machine where I tried to connect, right, to connect to the Azure database. So I went to that virtual machine and I would like to see the overview details of that virtual machine. And if you see the networking, under the networking, you see the public IP address and private IP address. The private IP address 10.0.0.7 is the one that we have actually seen. It did not give the public IP address or any other information. Now let's talk about the next layer of security, identity and access management. So identity and access management is all about the authentication and authorization. So basically, authentication is like, you are telling, like you are trying to connect to the Azure portal and you are proving that you are the authenticated user trying to connect to the Azure portal. Authorization, that's authentication, like you are trying to connect to the Azure portal. Authorization is like you are proving that you are the authorized person trying to access the resources itself, like databases, tables, whatnot. So let's talk about the authentication. So underneath the authentication, as you are proving you are the user trying to connect to the Azure portal, there are like um, there are like features like multi-factor authentication set in place. Like if you use Azure portal, you already know it. Like when you try to connect to Azure portal, you get that multi-factor authentication to your authentication app or to your phone. The code that you have to enter into the um, enter, and then you that's how you will be entering into the portal. That's you are authenticating that you are the user who is trying to access. This authentication is actually available for both Azure SQL and managed instance supports. And uh, when we talk about the authentication, SQL authentication and Azure Active Directory authentication both are available. You can also, like when you are building the Azure SQL or the managed instance, you can actually choose both of them, or you can only choose Azure Active Directory authentication only. And let's say, for example, you are building the Azure SQL database. While you are building the Azure SQL database, you will be actually creating a logical server, because that's how you will be connecting to your Azure SQL database using the management studio. So you have to build a logical server. So while building the logical server, you will be providing the server like SQL authentication ID and password while you are building the logical server. So this particular SQL ID and SQL authentication ID and password will automatically become the server level principal. And if you are building a managed instance, then that particular ID and password will become the sysadmin server role. It will become the part of sysadmin server role. And if we talk about the authorization is all about like accessing the resources itself. So there are like um, custom based roles that you can build, as well as the default database roles that we have. If you are building Azure SQL or managed instance, both of them will support the database roles as well as the custom roles as well. As well as you can also give the row level security, because that's the principle of the least privilege that is used in the Azure. So let's talk about the like the logical server, right? The logical server that you build while creating the Azure SQL database. Let's say that DG test server, in my case, is a logical server that I build. So while building this server, I have provided the SQL authentication login ID as Deepthi. If you see the highlighted one, that will automatically become the server admin. And there are certain role-based access control that you have while you give the access to the resources. So role-based access control, um, it is all about like what can and cannot be done to the resources. There are like three um, major default roles that we have while assigning the users to your resources. Owner is actually, they can do everything. Like if you have given the access to a resources as an owner, they can actually read, modify, and they can also assign other users to your resources. Contributor is like they can read as well as modify, but they cannot assign other people as the they cannot assign other people anything. Reader, they can only read all the resources that we assign them to. So these permissions, these role-based access control default roles, they can be um, actually inherited. You can give these permissions at the subscription level, resource group level, as well as the resources underneath these resource group. So they can also be inherited. So where do we see these role-based access control default roles? So to access those, we need to try to give a user the permissions so that we can see those roles. So DG test server is my server. Underneath that, overview, and then you have the other blades over there. So you need to do access control, which is IAM. Click on the access control, and then you try to add a user. Click on add role assignment, which will open up the role assignments that we have, and the top three are the default roles. You have the other roles as well, But these are the main three default roles: the owner, contributor, and reader. If you read the description, they will describe the same thing that I have described. So you can go ahead and give these roles to the users. You can easily assign these roles. So let's go ahead and talk about logins, users, and the differences between the managed instance and the Azure SQL database. So when you build the managed instance, while building the managed instance, you can create the Azure Active Directory server admin. Like I said, the ID and password that you provide, that will become the server admin. So you can choose the Azure Active Directory, or you can choose the SQL logins as well. Both of them you can build on managed instance. SQL authentication as well as like Azure Active Directory logins as well. And you can build just like the way you build logins, and you have users associated with those logins in your on-prem servers. The same way you can build the logins and associated database users. If you do not like the logins for your users, you can also build the contained users. Contained users are the users which will have the ID and password without without the need to have a login. So you can have the ID and password directly, getting the access to your resources like the database and the resources within the database like tables and views. You do not have to have the login. So while connecting, you will be providing the database that you are trying to connect, and you can directly access the resources. So when we talk about the Azure SQL database, like I said, like the login ID and password that you build here will become the server admin. So in the Azure Active Directory, like Azure SQL database, you can build the Azure Active Directory logins, SQL logins, and apart from those, you have two different roles additionally, which you do not have in the managed instance. They are the login manager as well as the DB manager roles. So these are the roles that they have built for the Azure SQL database, just so we do not need to give them the server admin access. We can limit the server admin access by adding these two roles, login manager and DB manager. Just like the way we have the managed instance database users and contained users, we can also create those in the Azure SQL database. But the thing that you need to remember importantly is that if you would like to um, if you would like to create any Active Directory logins or any SQL logins, the only way you can do that is by accessing the Azure SQL database by the Azure Active Directory server admin only. You cannot do that by accessing the SQL login. That's the difference. Now let's talk about the data encryption. So when we talk about the Azure's like the data protection layers in Azure, there are like three flavors in it. Encryption in transit. Encryption in transit meaning like when the data is being pulled in and out of the database and trying to connect, like sending the data from the database to the application and from the application to the database. That's the data being in transit, right? So we need to make sure the data is being encrypted during the transit phase while moving in and out of the database to the application and from application to the database. And that is being done automatically by default. It's enabled through transparent layer security, which is also known as TLS. The next layer is encryption at rest, meaning like when the data is at rest, right, on the drives in the form of database files, log files, backup files, all of these files need to be encrypted as well. So how does the data in at rest is encrypted? It will use the transparent data encryption, and it is enabled by default. So We have this option as well. And the third one is encryption in use. Not only while the data in transit needs to be encrypted, at the same time data at rest needs to be encrypted. Both of them are by default enabled. The next one is in use. While the data is being processed in the SQL engine, right? It also needs to be encrypted. So it uses like something known as uh, always encrypted by using the technology data enclaves, which we are going to talk in the coming slides. So let's talk about the data encryption in transit. Like I said, it is being enforced and enabled by the transparent layer security. So there are different versions of TLS versions that we have in Azure. All that you need to make sure is, though it is being enforced by default, you need to make sure like you are using the latest version, because as days pass, the old versions will not be supported. So it is always advisable to use the latest version of TLS. And the other thing that you need to make sure is like from your application, the encrypted connection from the applications, this particular option, which you are seeing in the third point, needs to be turned on. Because if that option is turned off, you cannot connect to your Azure SQL database. And you need to make sure that the version of TLS that you are using is supported from your application perspective. So where do we see this TLS version, right? Where do we actually go ahead and choose? BG test server is my logical SQL server that I have built. Underneath the security blade, go to networking and go to the connectivity tab. Underneath the connectivity tab, you see encryption in transit. That's when the data is coming in and out of the database to the application and from application to database. The minimum TLS version, you have all of these 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2. The latest is 1.2. I believe like 1.0 is not supported, but the suggestion is to use the latest version. But here is where you can go ahead and choose your TLS version. Now let's see the encryption at rest. Database files, log files, backup files needs to be protected, and um, encryption um, needs to be done in real time as you pull in and out of the data, right? As it goes into the drives and as it comes out of the drives. Like I said, it is enabled by default and it is supported by a transparent data encryption, and it is done by two ways. Either you give Microsoft the ability to manage your keys, because this is done by the keys. Like it will create the keys and manage the keys. You can go ahead and give the permissions to those keys to the users. But everything like managing part, the Microsoft is going to take care of it. That's by default, it's enabled. But if you want to take care of those keys, like building the keys, managing the keys, rotating the keys once they are expired, you need to choose the option bring your own key. Um, so you are responsible to build the keys, saving those keys in the key vault. Key vault is a place where it's a Microsoft product, where you need to go ahead and create the key vault, and you can save the keys in the key vault. You can save them there. It's very simple to create. Now let's go ahead and see how we can access this particular data encryption, transparent data encryption. So underneath the security demo, this is my SQL server and another SQL server. Underneath the security, go to the third option, transparent data encryption. That's where we will see these options, right? Transparent data encryption. You have two options. The first one is service managed key. Service managed key is same as like Microsoft managed key. The second one is the customer managed key. We are mainly focusing on the second option, customer managed key, because in the first option, not much you will be handling it. But in the second option, customer managed key, you need to build your own key. You need to build your own key vault where you will save those keys. So let's go ahead and select the key, but we do not have any key right now. So first we have to go ahead and create the key vault. So creating the key vault is very simple. If you are using the Azure portal, go ahead and search for the key vault, and you will get the key vault. With couple of clicks, you can create the key vault. You need to provide the subscription details like subscription and then name of the key vault. Very simple. Like for example, if you have multiple clients, you do not want to put all of these keys in one place. You can build multiple key vaults because it's not much cost. With low cost, you can get these key vaults. You can build multiple key vaults and you can put all of the keys related to that particular client separately. Easy to manage and easy to rotate those keys because you are building your own keys, right? So let's say we have built the key vault. Now underneath the underneath the key vault, left side your screen, underneath those blades, go to the keys. So underneath the objects, go to the keys. So here I have already built two of the keys, but let me go ahead and click on one of those keys to show you how we can create it. Click on security demo 1. So it is showing the current version. That is by default, it will create it for you. Um, that you will done internally. You do not have to worry about that. But the thing that you need to choose is the activation key and when do you want to expire? When do you want this particular key to be expired? So if you open up in detail of the key, you can see the details that you need to provide. From the top, if you see the properties, the key type, RSA key size, you do not have to worry about those because those are internally built by Microsoft. You need to just provide the activation date, set the expiration date, and if you would like to give this particular key the access permissions, right? The permissions to operations like encrypt, decrypt operations. You can also go ahead and click on those options if you want to make sure like you give permissions to this key to encrypt and decrypt. And then you can go ahead underneath the key vault again, go to the access policies, left side your screen. Once you click on that, you can actually start assigning the people to actually unwrap the key, wrap the key, giving permission to those keys to the people. So here I added myself as a user and I have given the permissions to wrap and unwrap the key. So now I have actually created the key vault and then I have built the key, right? Now, after doing that, go back to your security demo SQL server. In my case, underneath the security, go to transparent data encryption. Because I want to build my own key, I have chosen customer managed key. Now I want to select the key that I have been built. So click on select the key and go ahead and change the key because I have selected a key. Now I would like to go ahead and change the key. Click on change the key and then choose all the options like in what subscription this key vault is there and choose the key vault, name of the key vault and which key you want to use for this data encryption, right? So go ahead and do that. And then as you do that, the version of the key will be automatically popped up. And once your key get expired, right, it is up to you. You have to come here and then you have to create a new version of your key. Go ahead and click on select, and then click on save to update your key. That's the transparent data encryption. Now let's go ahead and talk about the encryption in use, which is the third option. Your data not only at rest and in transit, it should also be encrypted while in use, like while the data is processed within the SQL engine. Now, data enclave is a feature that is being used. to do that. So that is called a secure enclave. It is always encrypted with the secure enclave. So you need to remember that when you see this diagram, that there is this driver in between your database engine as well as your application, database client application. Um, you have SQL client driver that will do this process of encrypting and decrypting your data while being processed. So the database engine will delegate the operation on encrypted data to this enclave where the data can be safely decrypted as it is being processed. So what kind of operations will take the advantage of this secure enclave? What kind of operations are supported? As these are the queries, right? Queries that will be processed within the SQL engine. Any queries that have like the like ranges, queries with greater than, less than, sorting operations, indexing operations, those sort of queries will actually be supported with the data enclave, with the secure enclave. Now let's go ahead and talk about the dynamic data masking. This is like similar to the data masking that you have on-prem, on your on-prem servers. But please remember that the data masking is masking of your data within your SQL server, within your tables and column data. It is not encryption. So once you turn on the data masking, doesn't mean that your data at rest, like your data files, log files, backup files are being encrypted. It's not that. Two different features, right? If you want to do the data masking, go to your database, like Azure SQL database, AdventureWorks in my case, underneath the security, go to the dynamic data masking, where you can go ahead and with few clicks, you can go ahead and create data masking on your columns. You have to just have the details of your schema. Again, it's like a drop down. Schema, table name, column name. As you choose the column name, it will automatically show you the default mask function you can use, the default values. That's how you can do the dynamic data masking. And the other thing is like to give the permissions to unmask and mask permissions. It's similar way like you do with the on-prem servers. With T-SQL, you can go ahead and provide the unmask and mask permissions. Let's talk about the threat protection and detection, which is one of the defense layer in the Azure. So underneath the threat protection, we have different options like Azure Defender, SQL Auditing, and Azure Security Center. So when we talk about the Azure Defender, we have two different options, which is SQL Vulnerability Assessment. So what the SQL Vulnerability Assessment does is, once you turn it on, it will make sure it will go ahead and compare your configuration with the Azure standard configuration options for your Azure SQL database. If if it is differing from the standards of the Azure, that particular assessment details will be captured and it will shown in your Azure Defender once you enable this, so that you can go ahead and either make those standards as your standards or you can just ignore them. And the other flavor is SQL threat detection. SQL threat detection is like the watchman for your home. Like it will go ahead and make sure like who is entering, who is exiting, who is logging in and logging out, any different kind of weird connections coming from a different locations. If somebody else is trying to access from a very different location, then let me go ahead and send the email if the email is being created, like to get the notifications. Let me go ahead and send this particular threat because we detected some kind of connectivity, like suspicious activity. Those kind of details are being captured once you turn this particular SQL threat detection on. The next one is SQL auditing, is similar to the auditing that you have in on-prem. And Azure Security Center is like a centralized location where you can see all of these captured details. Let's talk about the Azure Defender. So Azure Defender, you can turn it on, like go ahead and connect to your server, logical server in my case here. And I would like to um, click on auditing, which is a part of security again. And once I go there, I will turn the Microsoft Defender for SQL to be turned on. Once you turn it on, you have certain options like where do you want to store these details that is being captured. Once you choose your subscription, go ahead and select the storage account where you want to save these details. And if you'd like to get the reports once the data is being captured over time, you can even share the email address here to send those details. Once you enable this option, give some time for the SQL Server to grab all the, like to compare with the standards, the assessments, right? To compare with the Azure um, vulnerability assessment details, it needs to be compared. So give some time, like about like 1 hour or some time. I have given around like 45 minutes to grab this information. Once it gets the information, you can go ahead and connect to the server. Underneath the security, go to the Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Under that, I have seen certain recommendations and findings here. So I would like to go ahead and look into the details. So at the bottom of the page, you see view additional recommendations in Defender for Cloud. So I have clicked on that to see additional details and recommendations. Now there are like many recommendations here. And I see two colors, red as well as green. So red indicate like you need to more focus on them. Green is like these are the insights. Less amount of resources will be are unhealthy. You can look at them, but more focus on like the red one, which needs like so you need to more focus on them because many resources are unhealthy there. So you can go ahead and look into more details into it. So if I want to see this one at the database level, you can see this at the server level as well as at the database level. So connect to the database like Adventure works in my case. And underneath the security, you have Microsoft Defender for Cloud again. I see underneath this database, I have seen three findings. So I would like to see more of these details. So I will click on the highlighted blue, view all recommendations in Defender for Cloud. So once I click on that, I have seen the vulnerability assessment findings. So Azure has actually compared with the standard configuration with our database configuration, and it have given these details. If you see the ID, those are the configuration standards from the Azure perspective. So I would like to go ahead and, for sample, I would like to see it here because severity, it shows right side your screen, it shows like high and low severity. So I would like to see the first one, database owners are as expected. It says like as expected, but the details, if I see it here, it it says in the recommendation that like remove unnecessary database owners. But the Azure doesn't know if I need those owners on my database. I wantedly created myself as a owner over there, and I would like to add the other people as well because with for my standards for internally I need those. So you can either see the recommendation and you can see, hey, I didn't mean to provide this account as an owner. So let me go ahead and grab this recommendation and you can see the details like it has actually provided the remediation script as well to drop that member as a owner. You can copy and then execute, or if you would like to make it as a baseline, you can just ignore and click on add all results as baseline. Because if you add that, next time it won't show you any any of these assessment details, or you can either remove from the baseline. Now let's go ahead and see the auditing. So auditing, similar to the way, like once you enable the audit, you get all the audit logs. So at the server level, again, go to the security blade, click on auditing. Auditing is actually enabled by default. So once you enable, like once you have that enable at the server level, it will automatically audit all of your databases underneath that server. Provide the details like the subscription details, and then if you would like to create the storage account, or like here, for example, I have created a default workspace where I would like to go ahead and um, capture all the logs and place them over there. So I have created the default workspace. And at the bottom of the screen, if you see, enable audit of Microsoft support operations. So if you would like Microsoft to support you, if you have any issue, like if you opened a support ticket with them, and if you'd like them to also access your logs, then you need to enable this. If you disable this, they will not have the ability to view your logs. So recommended to have this turned on. So once you turn it on, right, to view the logs at the database level, go to the database like AdventureWorks in my case. Underneath the security blade, go to the auditing and click on view audit logs. Once you click on view audit logs, you will have a dashboard that where you can see the details. Click on the view dashboard, which will give you two different kinds of views here. The circle one that you're seeing on the left side of your screen, that's the data governance. That's for the data classification, which we are going to talk in the coming slide. But for now, look at the highlighted one, which is Azure SQL Security Insights. Click on that to see more details of what it is showing. It shows the audit distribution, and if you see the action name under the highlighted audit distribution, it shows like batch completed, RPC completed, the audit log events, right? Click on that to see more details. Like you will see all the details, like you can edit the query, and you can see the details like um, server instance name, database name, object name, whatnot, the statement which has run, um, all the details like host name and every information. Like you can you can edit the query, you can get all the details. These are the audit logs. Now let's talk about the last layer of security, which is data governance, also known as data classification, where we would like to classify our column data based upon the sensitivity. So basically, you can give the sensitivity label to your columns. Now, why do you want to do that, right? It's not just like giving the sensitivity label to your column data, but also it's like it is helping you to audit that particular sensitive data. So once you give the sensitivity label to your column data, it will go ahead and capture if anybody is trying to access that sensitive data, it will go ahead and capture those logs in your audit logs, and you can get the details from the audit logs. So let's say we are connecting to our Azure SQL database, AdventureWorks. Underneath the security, you are going to data discovery and classification. And it is simple to give the sensitivity labels, to give the labels to your sensitive columns. It's like the drop down menu. Like you need to know the schema, table name, column name, and like what kind of sensitive label you wanted to give. Highly confidential, confidential, or low confidential. You have certain options over there. You can go ahead and choose them. So once you give those options, it will go ahead and start capturing the data if somebody wants to, like somebody trying to access. Let's say I tried to access those sensitive data to show you like how it looks like. So I will go ahead and look at the auditing report again. I'll connect to the database. I'll click on the auditing blade, open the records, and then view the dashboard. It will show the similar kind of dashboard. And here it will show you the number of queries that executed and what are the details of the queries. Now I would like to go ahead and click on the number of queries, and it shows like financial data is being accessed. Now I would like to go ahead and click on it to see more details. And if you see, it will show you all the details like what is the exact query. Here I have created the product ID as a sensitive, highly confidential data. So that particular column has been accessed. So I would like to click on that one to get more details into it. Like it will capture all of that information. Again, it's an audit data. I believe I have covered all of the like overview of all of those in-depth layers, and there is still a lot more to learn about security. So what I did was like as an extension to this particular session, I have created a series of blog posts on each of those layers in depth. It will cover the extension of this particular session. So you can go ahead and look at my blog post dbanuggets.com, and if you see underneath the blog the category Azure, you will be seeing those each layer I have described as a single blog post. So there are like series of blog posts. You can go ahead and look into it if you'd like to. And where did I get all the resource information, right? There is a series of videos done by Microsoft. Um, so Anna Hoffman has actually interviewed the product team itself, like security product team itself, and they have around like seven videos, I believe, and each of the video like 1 hour or 1.5 hour. So I have learned everything from those videos, and I have curated, I have learned, and then I have prepared this presentation. Like if you would like to go ahead and learn from those videos, please follow these resources. And I would like to thank Kevin, and then Tracy Bogiano one more time for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Again, my contact details and my blog post, LinkedIn, everything is in here. Like if you have any questions, if you do not want to ask here, you can definitely contact me later. And yeah, thank you so much for taking your time today. Hopefully you liked it.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation. Um, like I mentioned in chat, folks, if you have any questions, now is the best time to ask them. Get a thank you in chat. I think that this was a very good overview, a nice explanation of a lot of the services and capabilities that are available in Azure when you're thinking about it from a data platform specialist point of view.
Thank you.
And we'll give it just a few more seconds just to see if there are any questions from anybody in chat. Get them in, even if it's just as simple as, hey, I've got a question. And then you type your question, because then it gives me an opportunity to say, somebody has a question. And then we can vamp for a little bit until your question is in, versus my having to be vamping in the hopes that perhaps somebody will ask a question. And then if nobody does ask a question, then we've been vamping for no reason at all, which it's okay on its own, but it's better to have a reason to vamp. Anders does not have a question for once, so no questions from Anders. We'll see if anybody else does, but it looks like maybe not. So how about I go into my wrap-up spiel, and if there is a last-second question, it just slides in. We'll get it asked. But in the meantime, remember everybody, next Tuesday is our business intelligence and data science meeting. And that you can find the details at meetup.com/trypass. We're going to have Control Your Data Lake with Databricks SQL Warehouse by John Miner. So John's going to give us a remote presentation next Tuesday, and that'll wrap it up for the month of March. Looks like no questions, so I think what we're going to do is wrap things up. Again, we certainly appreciate you taking the time this evening to talk to us about Azure Security, Deepthi, and much obliged.
My pleasure.
And so let's close things down. And until we see each other again, everyone, take care.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye.